guys, welcome back to Algebra 2. Today we are going to cover 4.5 quadratic equations, and so we are going to look at solving quadratic equations by factoring and solving equations by graphing. So let's get started. So this is huge for the rest of your mathing careers. Finding zeros of a function is going to come up a lot, okay? And so whenever we're looking at this, we are looking at zeros of a function. So with lines, we looked at the y-intercept, okay? We don't really care about what a y-intercept is for a quadratic. We care about the x-intercepts. So these are the zeros. You're gonna hear them referred to as zeros, roots, solutions, and x-intercepts. Those four vocab words are interchangeable. So we are finding the solutions or the zeros. Whenever you're finding the solutions or zeros, your two main vocab words, we're looking for the x-intercepts, okay? And so if we graph a parabola, so if we look over here, we have f of x. And so wherever our graph f of x intersects the y-axis, which would be right here and right here. Okay, those coordinate points, this one is 3, 0, and this one is 4, 5, 6, 0. Okay, so here, these x values, 3 and 6, those are solutions to our quadratic equation. Okay, and so what we can find out is if we have our y equals ax squared plus bx plus c, and it can be of any form, but the main thing you have to look at is if it's y equals our graph, if we set it equal to 0 and then solve for this right side, whether it be by factoring or graphing, then we can find our zeros. But this right here, it has to equal 0 because we plugged in a 0 for y, and both of these points, our y value is 0. Remember, to find an x-intercept, your y value is 0. So if we set our equation equal to 0 and we factor and we solve, we can find our x-intercepts, which are the solutions or the zeros or the roots. X-intercepts, that's how we can find in order for our graph, okay? And so you can use the zero product property. So if a times b equals 0, what that means is either a equals 0 or b is equal to 0. Because if you multiply something and one of these is 0, then you get a 0 out, okay? So we're gonna use that property to apply it. So again, there's two ways to solve, and that's by factoring and by graphing. And so we're gonna look at both of those today. So the purpose of this whole entire lesson is to figure out where a parabola, either algebraically or graphically, where it crosses the x-axis. And that gives us our solutions or the zeros to our quadratic, okay? So looking at some examples. And so we're literally just gonna keep doing examples. I think I'm gonna go over like 5 or 6 examples. And so it'll be kind of quick. Pause if you need to, email me if you have questions. So if we have what are solutions of the quadratic equation x squared minus 5x plus 6 is equal to 0. So here we have a quadratic in standard form. First thing before you get started, make sure it's equal to 0. If it does not equal 0, we have to move everything to one side. That will come up. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna factor this x squared minus 5x plus 6. Okay, so we know we have our parentheses, x squared, we get x times x, and that equals 0. So we're looking for the two numbers that multiply to 6, but add to get a negative 5. So for 6, we have 1 and 6, and then 2 and 3. To get a negative 5, we have a negative 2 and negative 3. So these are my two factors that multiply to get a positive 6, but add to get a negative 5, okay? So we have our two factors. We have two parentheses. So from here, the new step, so we learned from 4.4 to factor this left side. The new step in order to solve is we just set each factor equal to 0. So we're gonna say x minus 2 equals 0, and then the x minus 3 equals 0. And then we solve for x. Here we add 2 to both sides, so x equals 0 plus 2 is 2. Here we add 3 to both sides, so x equals 0 plus 3 is 3. And so our solutions are x equals 2 and 3. Okay, and you just list them 2, 3. There's your answer, x equals 2 and x equals 3. If you notice, in our parentheses, they're both negative, but our answers are both positive, and those are opposite of, okay, and you can kind of see that, but you have to be careful about, whenever you change it to be the opposite. So if it's a factor, then you can equal it to 0 and it changes to be the opposite sign. Okay, so there's one example. Okay, so here we're solving by factoring, and so we have m squared minus 9m plus 8 is equal to 0. So again, before we solve for factoring, make sure it's equal to 0. And then whenever I copied this, I left off the equals 0, so there it is, but it equals 0. So we're going to factor this left side. So we have m, I'm going to change that to an x value since we're graphing. So it would be x times x. Okay, and so if we are factoring our positive, we're looking for the numbers that multiply to get positive 8, but add to get a negative 9. Okay, so for 8, we have 1 and 8, 2 and 4. The only way to get a negative 9 would be a negative 8 and a negative 1. So I'm going to take those factors and put them right here. So once we've factored that left side, here's where we break it up. X minus 8 equals 0, and x minus 1 equals 0. And then we just solve for x. Add 8, x equals 8. Add 1, x equals 1. So our solutions are x equals 8, comma, and 1. So if we graphed our parabola, okay, we know since a is positive, it's a 1, it's going to open up. And we know our vertex is positive 9 over 2 times 1, so that would be 4.5. And then we can plug that in. So I'm roughly be 4.5. It'll be there and it'll be down. And then at 1 and 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, so our parabola would look roughly like that. But here at 1 and here at 8 is where it crosses the x-axis. And those are your solutions. Okay. Here's some more examples. So here's 2 examples. Here we get into a little bit more special cases, and we're going to have to do some manipulating. So if we have number 1, we have x squared minus 9 is equal to 0. So if you look here, we only have 2 terms. So this is a special factoring case. So anytime you see just 2 terms, first thing, see if they have something in common. If they do, factor it out. Second thing, if they don't have anything in common, look to see if they're both perfect squares. Okay, so for 1, if we have x squared minus 9 is equal to 0. First off, it's equal to 0, so we're good to factor this x squared minus 9. Okay, so if we have x squared minus 9, we think, okay, 1, does it have something in common? Well, x squared and 9, no, they don't have something in common. Second thing, are they perfect squares? Okay, so x squared is a perfect square, x times x. And 9 also is a perfect square. We can square root both of these. 9 would be a plus or minus 3. So we can go ahead and easily factor this. To get x squared, we have x times x. To get a positive, or the 9, we have a plus 3, and we have a minus 3 equals 0. Okay, so that's a special case. You just square both of these for your 2 terms. Okay, set them equal to 0. X plus 3 equals 0, and x minus 3 equals 0. Subtract 3, x equals negative 3. Here we add 3, x equals positive 3. So your solutions are, you can say x equals plus or a minus 3, or you can say x equals 3 and a negative 3. Those are the same thing, plus or minus 3 or 3 and a negative 3. Okay, so let's look at 2. We have x squared plus 13x is equal to negative 36, okay? So if you look here, hopefully this is kind of a ding, ding, ding. We can't just like factor this left side because, oh, we have an equals of negative 36. We need equals 0. So we have to get this to be nothing on that side. So we add 36 to cancel it. Add 36. So now we have x squared plus 13x plus 36 is equal to 0. So now we can factor that left side since now it says equals 0. Okay, you have to be careful and make sure you do the opposite. You do your inverse to move it and not just put it over on the other side. You have to do your opposite of your inverse of the sign. Okay, so now we factor. So we have our x and x to get x squared. So we have to figure out what multiplies to get 36 but adds to get 13. Okay, so for 36 we have 1 and 36, 2 and 18, 3 and 12, 4 and 9, 6 and 6. So 4 and 9 gives us 13. They're both positive, but these are positive, so that's kind of easy. Plus 4 plus 9 equals 0. So now that we've factored, we're going to say x plus 4 equals 0 and x plus 9 equals 0. Solve, subtract 4, x equals a negative 4. Subtract 9, x equals negative 9. So your solutions are a negative 4 and a negative 9. If you notice, look, positive 4, positive 9, negative 4, negative 9. So if you go from factor to your zeros, it's always the opposite sign, okay? Okay, a couple more examples, and then we're going to look at what you do if we graph it, and then we're done. Okay, so here, let's look at 16 and 17. So 16 and 17 are two special cases, because if you look, so let's do 16 first. 16x squared plus 4x is equal to 0. Okay, 6x squared plus 4x is equal to 0. Okay, first check, equal to 0. Good. Second check, we only have two terms, so let's see if they have something in common. Okay, well 6x squared plus 4x. So I said x twice, so we know they at least have an x in common, so we're going to factor something out. Okay, so 6 and 4, the highest thing they have in common is a 2, and then x squared and x, they also have an x in common, so we're going to factor that out. So 6x squared, if we factor out a 2x, that would be left with the 3x. And double check, 2x times 3x is 6x squared. Okay, 2 times 3 is 6, x times x squared. Okay, or you can think about dividing it out. 4x, if we have 4x, we factor out a 2x, that leaves us with a positive 2 equals 0. Okay, so we're done factoring. We have our two factors. This is what tricks kids all the time. So we still say 2x equals 0, and we still say 3x plus 2 equals 0, and we're still solving for our x. So here, we divide by 2, so x equals 0 divided by 2 is 0. Anytime you factor out an x variable, your zero is always going to be 0. Okay. Here, if we subtract 2, 3x is equal to negative 2. So here we have our first fraction. Okay, so x is equal to negative 2 over 3. Okay, and I'm not sure on Math Excel if it wants the fraction or the decimal. You can also say negative 0.67. You round it to the nearest hundredth. So our x's here are 0 and negative 2/3. Okay, and then 17, we have 2x squared is equal to 8x. Okay, so first, it doesn't equal 0, so we need to move everything. I always like to keep my x squared term positive if possible. So I'm going to move my 8x to the other side, and I'm just going to subtract it. Okay, we cannot combine those, so it's just 2x squared minus 8x is equal to 0. Okay, now check, do they have something in common since we have two terms? And they do. They have a 2 and an x in common, so we're going to factor out 2x. So if we have a 2x squared, we factor out 2x, all we have left is x. Negative 8x, we factor out a 2x, all we have left is a negative 4 equals 0. And so we have 2x is equal to 0, and then we have an x minus 4 is equal to 0. Okay, so we divide. Same like over here, we have a factor with our x. If we divide by 2, your x is just 0. Here, add 4, your x is 4. So here your zeros are 0 and 4. Okay. And then let's look at what do we do if we graph. Okay, and so I pulled this graph off of Desmos. So long story short, all of these can be solved with graphing. However, I don't want you to take the shortcut and only do it by graphing. You need to check it. You can check it with graphing, but if it says to solve by factoring, you need to solve by factoring, okay? Because this is a huge important, you have to be able to factor in Algebra 2, okay? And in pre-calc and trig, in your further math classes, you have to be able to factor. And so I'm making it mandatory to factor. But you can use Desmos to graph, to check it, or if it says to solve by graphing, okay? So here it says what are the solutions, and so we have 2x squared, and so we're gonna set, if it says to solve by graphing, obviously you can graph. 2x squared plus 7x is equal to 15. Okay, so what we're gonna do is, first off, it doesn't equal 0. Okay, so we have to subtract 15 to both sides, cancel, cancel, and so that would be 2x squared plus 7x minus 15 is equal to 0. Okay, and so we rewrote it in standard form. And so whenever you go to Desmos, whenever you plug it in, this is what you plug in. We don't plug in the equals 0 part, like how we don't plug in the equals y part. I don't know if you can plug in equals 0. Just plug in your quadratic in standard form. Okay, so when you plug that in, this graph comes up and it kind of gives you a lot of information. But what we're looking for is just solutions, and so those were where your graph crosses the x-axis. And so there's going to be little gray dots. If you click them, these coordinate points come up, and so your x values are -5 and 1.5, okay? Here, we do not take the opposite sign. They are what they are. You only do the opposites if you factor. So here your x values are what they are, okay? If you notice, it also gives you your y-intercept of 0, -15. Okay, it also gives you your vertex of -1.75 and -21.125. Okay, so Desmos can give you a lot of information, so use that as a resource if needed. Okay, I think that is it. There are 7 total questions. Let me know if you have any issues, comments, or concerns. And we're only doing 4.5, not 6. So, all right, bye.